911 emergency operator 1-2.
CHP, we're in the pursuit right now.
What are you in pursuit of?
A white Hyundai.
There's two male blacks driving the vehicle. We need an air unit. You can get one up here.
March 3rd, 1991. Rodney King was driving a car with two of his friends in tow when he hit the gas after he saw the California Highway Patrol in his rearview mirror. The resulting high-speed chase would weave its way through the northern suburbs of Los Angeles and right into the history books of America. He was on parole, and he thought he might lose the CHP officers on his tail. But they were soon joined by the Los Angeles School District, a police cruiser, and ultimately the Los Angeles Police Department. The chase came to an end at a dark and empty lot on the corner of Foothill Boulevard and Osborne Street. And what would happen next would change the course of history, all because of 81 seconds of videotape.
All of us have witnessed the outrageous conduct of 14 police officers. It was all captured on videotape.
I was shocked by what I saw. Law enforcement officials cannot place themselves above the law.
When you see the tape, these are humans acting out. They're like wolves that are setting upon a little animal.
The force you see on that tape is unreasonable, it is excessive, and it is unnecessary. And based upon that tape and the reports that followed, we believe the jury is going to convict these defendants.
Literally, as America in the world was watching, my entire family found out that was my dad. And I felt like there's no way that he could make it through that.
It was horrible. So I couldn't watch it anytime without flinching.
This was nothing new. This was just, oh my God, somebody got it on video. And so now they can't deny it.
Again, Mr. King's conduct on March 3rd, 1991 is relevant to the case and relevant to the defense. You're going to see assaultive behavior in this case by Mr. King. It's just as simple as that.
This was LAPD under Daryl Gates. And I mean, so let's not pretend that, you know, Daryl Gates was what they referred to as a cop's cop, right? He never saw an ass whipping that he couldn't get excited about.
The overall impression that was given is that we have a racist department, a brutal department, and that is simply not true.
Yeah, South Central was a simmering cauldron of resentment between the police and the citizens of the community of South Central. Rodney King is just a spark on a tinderbox that has been there for some time, since the mid-'80s and the war on drugs by that point in South Central.
Most of the things that I heard from members of the white community were, this is terrible, this is outrageous, this is something that is an anomaly. It's unusual is the word that I'm looking for. It was not unusual to members of the black community. It was unusual to those who were looking at it through a different lens.
There was no way we'd get a fair trial in Los Angeles, so we had to get it moved.
Say, when the venue was changed, when the judge took it out of the county, I don't know that initially there was a full understanding of what the implications of that might be.
I don't think anyone out there really wants to be a cop out there anymore. Not if you get this kind of pressure and this kind of second guessing.
The defendants had made a motion that they wanted to get out of LA County for this publicity that didn't bode well for them in getting a jury that would be most likely to convict their clients, the 4 officers.
If he tried the case in downtown Los Angeles, that doesn't happen. But in Simi Valley, not only is it a white community, but it's a very white law enforcement-oriented community.
The minority community was not present there. It was gone. It was like the case was being tried in a cocoon.
That's quite helpful to the defense, and it puts the prosecution, it put them in a different position.
At this point, we're ready to proceed with the first phase of the trial.
We believe the evidence that is presented in this case will show beyond a reasonable doubt that the defendants are guilty of using unnecessary, unreasonable, and excessive force on March 3rd, 1991 in the arrest of Rodney King. The evidence is going to show, ladies and gentlemen, that Mr. King was speeding, that he did not stop, that he did not cooperate initially. The evidence is also going to show that the beating you are about to see is unjustified. Whatever he did, it did not allow Defendant Koon and Defendant Powell to write these false reports to cover up this incident. Ladies and gentlemen, they couldn't justify it 1 year ago, and no defendant in this courtroom will be able to justify it now.
At this point, proceed with the opening statements of the attorneys.
You will see through still photographs and through the videotape that Rodney King, without warning, rose to his feet and turned in a violent charge to Powell.
There was tension among the lawyers, but we agreed on 90% of what the defense was.
The conclusion of every officer who was there at the scene was that they had a duster on their hands, a person who was under the influence, PCP, or angel dust.
If the lawyers don't get along, can greatly complicate a trial.
His situation was one of fear and frustration, not pleasure in inflicting injury.
You don't do anything in one of these multi-defendant trials that hurts another defendant if you can avoid it.
Officer Briseno, my client, he went over to Officer Powell, who was like this. He puts his hand out like this. He grabs at the baton and he pushes him away.
Everything that's written in that report happened.
Throughout the course of this trial, we're going to hear that Rodney King and Rodney King alone was in control of the situation.
Then Officer Powell, in a matter of seconds, he took out his baton. He had it in a power swing, and he struck the driver at the top of the cheekbone, splitting his face from the top of his ear to his chin.
When you break it all down, the framework of Rodney King's story is actually quite simple. First, he was on parole the night of the incident, but that information was kept from the jury. Second, the trial had been moved from LA to Simi Valley. And that's important when it comes to number 3. It meant that the available jurors would almost all be white. There were no African Americans sitting in judgment of the accused officers. And finally, there was that infamous videotape. It showed that in 81 seconds, Rodney King was kicked and hit with a baton 56 times.
He was a super spontaneous person. He loved to make people feel welcome. He likes family. He considers his friends family.
He was a good guy. He was really an honest, kind of good guy. And I think he had respect for the law, respect for lawyers, and respect for the process.
Where did Mr. King drive to?
Going on to the 210 freeway going west.
As you were on the 210 freeway, did you notice something unusual?
I started seeing red lights.
When you say red lights, what are you referring to?
Police lights.
We need an air unit to get one up here. We're en route. The unit is en route to Camille Blacks and the vehicle still stopped at the light Foothill and Van Nuys. We're eastbound Foothill at Osborne now.
Did you ever bring it to his attention that there were police behind you?
Yeah.
What did you do?
I said, Rodney, police want to pull over, the police behind me.
Did Mr. King answer you?
No.
So when the red light went on and you saw it, you did everything that you could do to get his attention. Isn't that correct?
Correct.
How would you describe his response?
He wasn't turning, he wasn't saying nothing. He just kept on driving.
My sisters and myself hardly talked about that night with him, only because everybody constantly did that, and I wanted the happy stuff. But he was very aware, like he admitted it a lot of times. Like, I shouldn't have run, that was wrong.
And what happened next?
Then Officer Powell came up to the right of him. In a matter of seconds, he took out his baton. He had it in a power swing, and he struck the driver right across the top of the cheekbone, splitting his face from the top of his ear to his chin.
Melanie Singer described 5 head blows that were given to King by Larry Powell with the baton. Well, there were no injuries consistent with baton blows on the face.
What happened next?
That time, after he had struck the driver, I believe, on the left side of almost his temple. Sergeant Koon said, "Stop, stop, that's enough, that's enough." And then another officer with dark hair and a mustache reached in and grabbed the baton and pushed it back.
And looking at that photograph, does that appear to be split open there?
There is a cut there, yes.
All right, and how long is the cut?
What I can see, it looks about an inch, maybe less than that.
Well, you described in your earlier testimony, and then you just reiterated that the skin was split from the ear to the chin. Is that right?
I'm going to object. That states the evidence.
She just said yes.
Objection overruled.
And does that appear to be sutured in that photograph?
No, sir.
Does it appear to be split in that photograph from the ear to the chin?
No, sir.
Do you have any explanation for that?
I saw what I saw, sir.
Thank you. I believe the evidence will show that no head blows were delivered, certainly not in the manner described by Officer Singer. Baseball-type swings did not happen. Mr. King would not be alive today.
The jurors have to make an objective analysis, and we believe after they make an objective analysis, after looking at that tape, you're going to see a verdict of guilty for unreasonable, unnecessary, and excessive force.
I bought the camera for my then wife. We were young, we were starting out in life, and I thought it would be a good thing to have a camera to film, you know, the events of our lives.
Now, directing your attention to 12:45 a.m. in the morning, March 3rd, 1991, did anything unusual occur?
Yes, I was woken up by loud noise of sirens and a helicopter outside my window.
And when you looked out that window, what did you see?
I saw several police cars that had stopped a white vehicle there, and a lot of commotion going on. I ran to the living room. The camera was in the living room, grabbed it, and turning it on as I'm walking out of the balcony, and and then the rest you can see on the tape.
After he taped it, he realized that he had something quite incredible. Police officers beating a black man within an inch of his life. And he called a TV station in Los Angeles and told them what he had.
Did you form the impression that he was drunk because, from your viewing, he did not react to the baton blows?
Yeah, I just said that. Yes. To me, it looked more like he was trying to move and get away. He wasn't maybe protect himself, but I wasn't seeing aggressiveness on his part, on Mr. King's part. It was more defensive, trying to get away and stumbling.
Do you remember hearing officers yelling commands at Mr. King?
I heard shouts, yes, and they sounded like commands, but I couldn't distinguish what the words were. In my mind, when it was happening, I'm thinking, what did he do to these police officers to deserve that?
Here's the case that the defense presented. The video didn't capture the moments before the beatings, that there was aggressive behavior by King. In certain ways, it doesn't really matter what King did prior to the video. What matters is at some point they need to stop hitting him. And the question is, when are they obliged to stop hitting him?
Members of the black community were not shocked by the video. The overwhelming sentiment was, wow, I'm glad somebody finally got those people on tape.
In all your years of experience, Sergeant, have you ever seen a worse beating?
I've seen uses of forces of considerable violence, but I have not seen anything as violent as this in my 14 and a half years. No, sir.
George Holliday's videotape raised a number of questions that didn't seem to have consistent answers. Was Rodney King high on PCP? How did 2 taser shots seemingly have no effect on him? Was King trying to attack the police? Or was King trying to protect himself and escape the beating? Did Lawrence Powell hit Rodney King in the head with his baton? Because that would have been against LAPD policy. And just how serious were the injuries that King sustained in those early morning hours of March 3rd, 1991?
Well, there was evidence at trial, certainly by photographs of Rodney King, as well as anatomical drawings and whatnot, that showed that Rodney King has sustained a fracture of the eye orbit. And you don't fracture this orbit area by falling on your face on concrete.
What did Sergeant Koon tell you?
He stated specifically that the suspect had sustained a split lip from what he believed striking the pavement at the time he was taken into custody.
He had some dirt on his face and some blood. It didn't look like anything was struck on him. It just looked like a simple fall on the ground and kind of scraped his face up.
Now, you describe these injuries as minor, is that correct?
Correct.
Do you consider 9 to 12 facial fractures minor? Do you consider a broken cheekbone minor?
Yes.
I would not expect these series of findings to be caused by a single fall.
That morning, I went out to San Fernando jail, and his leg was casted. He was on crutches. He looked all banged up. And I started taking pictures of him. The deputy came in and said, "You know, Counselor, we don't allow you to take pictures of people, inmates." I said, "I just want to save these pictures, sir, to make sure that he doesn't have any new damages after you take him down to Men's Central Jail."
Do the photos accurately depict Mr. King's condition as it existed on March 6, 1991?
Absolutely.
I was instructed to take pictures of his injuries.
And were the injuries pointed out to you by somebody?
They didn't have to be.
Your next witness?
I can tell you that Stacy Koon was one of the most effective witnesses I've ever seen in any trial anywhere.
My name is Stacy Cornell Koon.
Given the fact that he had been portrayed as the leader, that he had been portrayed as this uncaring sort of animal.
What was the first thing that you observed when you arrived at that location?
First thing I observed was I did an initial assessment of what was going on, and I saw that there were a group of officers, LAPD, CHP, that had their guns out, drawn, and they were in the process of attempting to get Mr. King into a felony-prone position.
He gave compelling testimony.
At this time, I thought that the suspect was under the influence of PCP.
And why was that?
Because in my mind, he had exhibited this Hulk-like strength, which is I've come to associate with PCP. I ordered him to back off, and then I tased the suspect, Mr. King. Right. And then I ordered him to lay down. He continued to rise to his feet, and I tased him a second time.
Koon dropped him the second time with the taser. He goes down, no protective reflexes. He hits the pavement, and you can see his head bounce up.
You testified on direct examination that at least 2 times he let out what you called a growl or a yell.
I don't know exactly how I characterized it. It was more like a groan, like a wounded animal, a bear or something like that.
And this occurred after he had been shot with the taser device, is that correct?
That's correct.
Is it a fair assumption then that Mr. King was reacting to that taser device with an expression of pain?
With an expression of pain, yes.
So he was not impervious to pain, at least at that point, is that correct?
No, he obviously felt the pain at that time, or felt something at that time.
All of that to them added up to a suspect who was still not submitting.
I shouted to Officer Powell, "Don't hit him in the head."
All right. Why did you do that, sir?
Because Mr. King's arms were adjacent to his body, his head was between the arms, and Officer Powell was doing a series of power strokes. And it was my fear that Mr. King was moving and the baton was moving and Officer Powell was moving. There was a very real potential for Mr. King to get hit in the head.
All right. Did you see Mr. King get hit in the head?
No, I did not.
I knew that as I watched the video, Stacy Koons tried to justify, he's moving. Well, who wouldn't move when you're being hit repeatedly with the force that he was being hit with?
Did it occur to you that he'd already been hit a number of times and maybe he was defenseless?
No, I did not perceive at all that he was defenseless.
Is there a justification for him being hit as many times as he was? Perhaps, yes, if you're looking at it from the perspective of what he was doing from the perception of the officers that were engaging him.
Did you at any time believe that Mr. King had submitted to your authority or your arrest?
Only at the very end.
And how did he indicate that at the very end?
His arms were at his side, and the first words that were intelligible that I heard him audible at that time.
And what did he say to you?
He yelled, "Please stop."
And what did he do with his hands?
and then he raised his hands in what I consider to be a compliance mode.
Do you believe that your officers did anything improper?
No, this was a managed and controlled use of force. It followed the policies and procedures of the Los Angeles Police Department and the training.
Excessive means that you are using more force than is required to do the job. Well, that never happened. He never, I'm talking about Rodney King, never gave up until the very end when he said, okay, I give. And that's when Koon said, okay, he gives.
Watching the videotape now, is it your testimony that every one of the blows that you see on there is a justified use of force?
It's a reasonable and necessary using the minimum force. Yes, sir, that is my testimony.
Just had a big-time use of force, tased and beat the suspect of a CH pursuit big time. Oh, well, I'm sure the lizard didn't deserve it. Ha ha, I'll let them know.
In all your years of experience, Sergeant, have you ever seen a worse beating applied by officers of the Los Angeles Police Department?
I've seen uses of forces of considerable violence, but I have not seen anything as violent as this in my 14 and a half years. No, sir.
You used excessive force when you beat Rodney King, didn't you?
No, sir.
Officer Powell, you used inappropriate conduct in that incident with Rodney King, didn't you?
No, sir.
Officer Lawrence Powell was an honors student in high school and then graduated near the top of his class at the police academy. But after his first few years on the force, things weren't going so well. There were complaints of excessive force, one of which resulted in a 5-figure settlement by the city of LA. And maybe you can chalk this up to coincidence, but the very night that Powell was seen on tape beating Rodney King with his baton 40 times, he had just been singled out at roll call and chastised for improper use of that same baton.
It was important for the jury to hear that Powell had some difficulty with the baton during the roll call training, because it was important to see that what they were seeing on the video and the delivery of the baton strikes was not as effective as it should have been and could have been per the training.
Do you solemnly swear that the testimony you may give in the cause now pending before this court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God?
Yes, I do.
Lawrence was a very, very bright guy. He came from a police family, and he wanted to be a police officer.
Mr. King was resisting. I couldn't pull the arm out. And then suddenly I saw another officer on the right side, I don't remember who it was, grab the other arm, the right arm, and tug on that. And within a matter of a second or so, both arms came out and Mr. King's head slammed into the ground.
Was there ever a time when you swung your baton in forward and reverse power strokes and struck Mr. King in the jaw or face?
No.
Where were the cuts that you saw on his face?
I don't recall.
How many cuts did you see on his face?
I remember 2 or 3.
And the face is a pretty small area. Can you recall where the cuts were that you saw?
Well, I can say the general area would be between the forehead and the chin.
You didn't hit Mr. King in the head with a baton, did you?
No, I didn't.
After the event in 1991 in March, up through almost the beginning of the first trial, that videotape was shown almost constantly throughout the United States. But here's the worst thing about it, it was just the snippets of the worst part of the video. They didn't show King getting up and charging at Powell before he went down the first time.
What did you see Officer Powell do?
I saw Officer Powell begin to deliver a series of forward and reverse power strokes. I saw, in an exchange of blows, a blow strike Mr. King on the top of the shoulder and then come upwards and strike him across the left side of the face.
All right. Was that the only such blow?
No, it was not.
How many more were there?
There was another series, on the same exchange, there was one other blow.
Did any of these strikes or swings or blows that you saw delivered by Officer Powell hit Mr. King in the head?
No.
You'd remember that, wouldn't you?
Yes, I would. You don't know whether or not Mr. King was hit in the head with the baton before the first blows that you saw.
No.
All right, and you don't know whether or not Mr. King was subjected to excessive force before those blows that you first saw, do you?
No.
We took the jury several times through the video to basically show that what they were doing was always in response to what King was doing, which is the way you defend one of these.
Describe your mental state at the time you were striking him.
I was completely in fear for my life, scared to death that if this guy got back up, he was going to take my gun away from me, or there was going to be a shooting, and I was doing everything I could to keep him down on the ground.
He was continuing to roll and move around and try to get to his feet.
Officer Powell did call for the rescue ambulance, didn't he?
From listening to the tapes, yes, sir, I can verify that.
In listening to the tape, do you hear anything that is out of the ordinary?
Yes.
What is that?
I hear a person in the background laughing and saying victim of a beating, and then the first officer also appearing to laugh or giggle.
When you're in a excited state, does your breathing sound like laughter?
No, not mine.
Okay. But are you telling the jury here, as you sit here and testify, that's not laughter on that tape?
I'm saying I don't recall laughter, and I'm saying that's not laughter.
What message was sent to 16823?
Oops. What? So I haven't beaten anyone this bad in a long time.
Oops, I haven't beaten anyone this bad in a long time, was simply expressing frustration and surprise.
Unit 16823 sent a message back, and what was that message?
I think he was dusted many broken bones later after the pursuit.
You replied to her, sounds almost as exciting as our last call. It was right out of Gorillas in the Mist. That's what you typed into her, isn't it?
Yes.
And she typed back, ha, 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 ha. Let me guess who be the parties. Now, this incident that you're referring to, this last call right out of Gorillas in the Mist, it involved a family of African Americans, didn't it?
Yes, did.
All right. And in your description of these individuals, you called them gorillas, didn't you?
No.
Okay. Now, this call that involved these African Americans, was it in a jungle?
In a what?
A jungle.
No.
Was it at the zoo?
No.
Were there any gorillas around?
I didn't see any.
That doesn't mean that he acted with racial animus towards King. It means, though, that he has a kind of callous view of race at a minimum, and that he is ever so likely to have racial animus.
None of those officers behaved in a way that was motivated by a desire to punish or harm King because of his race.
I don't think there's any thinking about or talking about the King beating without reference to race.
And you asked Mr. King a question?
Yes, sir. I asked just basically his name and where he was, and he happened to ask me if he was going to be able to go to the big game tomorrow night, and I said, what game? He says, well, over at Dodger Stadium, and I said, well, I don't know, I don't know who's playing or anything like that. And he said, well, I work over there, and I said, oh. And he said, well, I'm an usher. And then Mr. Powell proceeded to make a comment, boy, I sure hope we don't ever go to the game and you have to usher us down to the seats.
And did Mr. King reply to that remark?
No, he didn't.
All right. And did Officer Powell say anything else?
It was after that, it was as I was continuing my examination, he made a comment like, well, we had a pretty good hardball game tonight, didn't we? Mr. King, he was confused as to what they were talking about. Oh, and they said, well, don't you remember the team we were playing against? Don't you remember the game? And it finally dawned on him that they were talking about himself, and he goes, oh, yes, you guys did have a hardball game tonight.
What did the officer say to that?
Officer Powell says, yeah, we hit quite a few home runs, didn't we?
Why did you say that?
Just to carry on a conversation with him.
And did you say that to Mr. King?
Yes.
Did you yourself say anything about hitting home runs?
No.
Did you say anything about playing baseball?
No.
About hardball?
No.
Had you ever met Mr. Davis before this evening?
No.
Had any personal contact with Mr. Davis?
No.
Any reason for Mr. Davis to hold a grudge against you?
No, I hope not.
Any reason for Mr. Davis to take an oath before this jury and then lie? To your knowledge?
Not to my knowledge.
So when Mr. Davis came in here and testified before this jury about the baseball comments, he was lying.
That's true.
He came in here, he took an oath to tell the truth, and he committed perjury. He lied. Is that correct?
When he said I said it, yes, he did.
Lawrence Powell wasn't necessarily as open and engaging maybe as he could have been in the testimony, but you're dealing with such a high-stress, anxiety-driven event that I think it would be natural for him to come across anxious or uncomfortable in the situation.
If you had someone who made racial comments before a beating, if you had someone who was giggling after a beating, if you had somebody who was bragging about the beating right afterwards and was taunting a suspect, wouldn't that make you question the reasonableness of that person's perception in the application of force? Wouldn't that make you question it?
All those together, yes, sir.
Powell was a young officer who was in a difficult circumstance.
You used excessive force when you beat Rodney King, didn't you?
No, sir.
Officer Powell, you used inappropriate conduct in that incident with Rodney King, didn't you?
No, sir.
I went up to Sergeant Koon. I asked him what the was going on out here.
Did you use just those words?
Yes, sir.
All right. Did he even acknowledge you were there?
No, sir.
After Officer Timothy Wind chose not to testify, Theodore Briseno was next on the stand. He was the cop who appeared on the video to push away Officer Powell's baton and then at one point step on King's neck and shoulders to try to subdue him. Briseno's defense was a little different. And frankly, at times it seemed like he was more at odds with his three co-defendants than the prosecutors and the state.
This court shall be the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth, so help you God. Yes.
Ted Briseno did not reveal what his defense was going to be. We had some suspicions because we could see in the video.
At the point where these power and reverse strokes were being delivered, what were you thinking?
I was thinking that he was delivering them to the head.
All right. Can you say for certain whether or not the baton hit the head, or was it in, sir?
No, sir.
In your mind, was it in the area of the head?
Yes, sir.
His perception of Rodney King's conduct was different than theirs.
Why are you stopping Officer Powell?
Because I didn't see Mr. King moving, and I thought Officer Powell was out of control then.
And so what are you trying to do?
Stop Officer Powell.
He thought the force was more than necessary from what he saw.
I went up to Sergeant Koon.
And what did you say?
I asked him what the was going on out here.
Did you use just those words?
Yes, sir.
All right, did he even acknowledge you were there?
No, sir.
He pushed back the officers and he put his foot on Rodney King's neck and shoulder to keep him down because he was concerned that the batons would continue to be applied to Mr. King if he got up.
You wanted to get up and stop it.
Yes, sir.
Would that mean that you thought these blows were unreasonable?
Yes, sir.
Would you say it was an unusual move on your part to step in and grab the baton of another officer?
Yes.
You've never had to do that before, have you?
No.
I'm sure he was ostracized for it. I mean, he was a real threat to their common defense. He was only implicated in one blow, but a hard one, a hard kick. You know, he shoved King down with his boot.
Could you describe Officer Briseno's demeanor right after getting into the unit?
He seemed to be very angry, very upset.
Did he say something to you?
Yes.
And what did he say?
Sarge should have handled it better. Sarge should have handled it better.
So when you saw Officer Briseno testifying last week, saying that officers from LAPD were using excessive force, you didn't think that made the department look bad, did you?
I just think that Officer Briseno was lying.
Officer Briseno, in your 9 years as a Los Angeles Police Department officer, have you ever seen one other LAPD officer give a beating to a suspect that you saw the beating received by Mr. King on March 3rd, 1991?
I have not.
Right. No further questions.
It's never this man's fault. Why not? This man laughed. This man taunted. And he's denying it.
One of the key questions in this trial was the force used on Rodney King excessive? The state said, hands down, yes. But the defense said the officers acted within the LAPD policy, that they were doing the job they were paid to do. They said from the get-go, King was aggressive and dangerous. That is, except for Ted Briseno. Officer Briseno admitted that it was too much force, that he tried to stop Lawrence Powell from beating Rodney King further. But as in many trials, the experts could not seem to agree.
Sergeant Duke, when you first looked at this videotape, did you possibly believe that it contained excessive force? Yes or no?
I'd have to say no.
The amount of force used by the officers was so far beyond any reasonable explanation that there's nothing that they could tell me short of the suspect had a weapon or was about to employ a weapon to justify that use of force.
We recognize that these defendants had a tough job to do. But recognizing that tough job, we also expect, and I think we demand, that a police officer follow the law. When you focus on Officer Powell on that videotape, you will see the brutality that I just alleged. You will see Officer Powell, who by far strikes Mr. King the most with the baton for no apparent reason. The man is not resisting. The man's not trying to escape. There's no reason for it. He's bragging about it. He's joking about it. He's having a great time about it. He beat the heck out of Mr. King, and he thought it was a funny joke. And at some point, you have to look at that video and say, enough is enough. Stop. Go in there, handcuff him. Stop this. This is not right. But they continue to hit him.
What you're here to determine is whether or not my client, Sergeant Koon, is guilty of serious felony charges because he was doing his job on March 3rd, 1991.
When we see an individual being struck with something like this baton, it's ugly, it's awful, but that's life on the streets. That's what these men and women are taught to do.
Of all the police officers at the scene, one officer steps forward and tries to stop his fellow officers.
You're here to determine whether or not he's to be labeled a criminal because he was trying to take Rodney King into custody.
If reasonable police minds can differ over the propriety of the use of force on March 3rd, 1991, then I suggest to you there is no proof beyond a reasonable doubt.
Why is it every time, every piece of evidence regarding Lawrence Powell that's bad, it's somebody else's fault? It's Terry White's fault. It's Alan Yochelsen's fault. It's Ted Briseno's fault. It's Lawrence Davis' fault. It's never this man's fault. Why not? This is the man, and look at him. This man laughed. This man taunted.
All right, Mr. White, get back to the podium, please, and confine your argument to the podium.
I'm sorry, Your Honor. You have to wonder, why all of the lies? Why? Because they know what's on that videotape. They know. They know it's unnecessary. They know it's unreasonable. They know it's excessive.
When the jury went out, and they were out for 7 days, during that time, in thinking about the trial and going over the things in my mind, talking with the other lawyers, I had a very strong belief that we were going to be okay on this one, that we would come out okay.
Have verdicts been reached on all other counts but this one count, and there's only one count in which the jury has not been able to reach a unanimous decision?
We, the jury, in the above entitled action, find the defendant, Lawrence M. Powell, not guilty of the crime of assault by force likely to produce great bodily injury and with a deadly weapon. We, the jury, find the defendant, Stacy C. Koon, not guilty of the crime of assault by force likely to produce great bodily injury and with a deadly weapon. We, the jury, find the defendant, Timothy E. Wind, not guilty of the crime of assault by force. We, the jury, find the defendant, Theodore J. Briseno, not guilty as charged in count 1 of the amended indictment.
My reaction is shock first and then disappointment. Obviously, we feel the evidence warranted a conviction on the defendants, and the jury disagreed with us, and we must abide by their decision.
There were problems with the prosecution, I have to say. Their biggest mistake was to not call Rodney King as a witness.
Leadership, Gates must go! Gates must go!
We ain't got no rights here.
It's an injustice. We all suffer from it.
When the acquittal was announced, I felt a great deal of satisfaction because I thought, well, we did a good job for these guys.
It was the wrong verdict. They were guilty. It was the only case, I guess, that I covered in which I could say, without any compunction about it, that they were guilty.
Rodney King has this to say to all the people of Los Angeles and all the people of the cities of the United States so caught up in this horror and hate.
People, I just want to say, you know, can we all get along? Can we get along?
The Rodney King case was about not only police brutality, but how we think about black folk, black men in particular, black folk more generally. Because if you don't have a lot of care and concern for someone who claims to be a victim, you're not going to vindicate their interest in a court of law. When you're a jury trying to weigh their interest against the interest of law enforcement, and you have a high regard for law enforcement.
I'd do it again, and I would encourage anybody that does have that footage to bring it forth, you know, that kind of footage. This is important stuff that helps us be better, you know, become better.
You know, this was the beginning, and we shouldn't even have gotten to this point. I think things haven't changed, but the world is waking up, the whole world. That's what pushes me to this day. I think we should ask, can we get along, and can we be equal, you know? What does it take? Like, what does it take?
The second King trial, the federal trial, took place in 1993. This time, Stacey Koon and Lawrence Powell were both found guilty and sentenced to 30 months each in prison. Ted Briseno and Timothy Wind were acquitted. In 1994, the city of Los Angeles paid Rodney King $3.8 million for medical bills, as well as the pain and suffering that he sustained in the beating. In June of 2012, Rodney King tragically died, drowning in his backyard swimming pool. He was just 47 years old. I'm Ashley Banfield. Thanks for watching.